2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. My name is Christoph Zürn, and this is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. Today we're in München, Germany, and we're talking to Björn Eichstädt, managing partner and co-owner of Storymaker and publisher of the digital magazine J-Big, Japan Business in Germany. Björn takes us on a trip to Japan, from J-horror films, Japanese spirits, film music, audio innovations, sound aficionados, and the sound design of the Tokyo Treinstation. And he shares the business habits and the harmony aspect in collaboration, the performance thinking of meetings in Japan, and the customer is God attitude. But let's start with a warning. This is by far the longest podcast in the Power of Music Thinking history. So if you're prepared to listen to 30 minutes podcasts, you might want to pause and listen further the next day. All right, let's dive into it. Hello, Björn. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking podcast.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. And funny enough, because we just talked about in our native language, so both we are German, and yes. But our podcast is in English, and so that's the funny part of it. So two Germans speaking English, that sounds nearly like a joke, but let's get right into it. Björn, my first question. What was your first sonic experience or album or concert that had an impact on you?
Oh my God. The first, I think one of the first albums that really got an impact on me was an album that probably the German listeners know, but not the others. And that was an album by a German singer-songwriter called Reinhard May. And the album was called Menschenjunges. And this was an album that my parents listened to at home. And I really liked this singer-songwriter because he was singing about having a child, and I was a child myself, and so this really influenced me in a way, like how adults look at children. So like how maybe my parents look at me. But to be honest, like music-wise, it was not so interesting. So I was more impressed by the words and the like this change of perspective, that looking at like how an adult might look at me. And I think this is something that has influenced me later because like changing perspectives and looking at things from like other perspectives and somehow building bridges between things is now my job. But the first album that music-wise had a big impact on me was a 1972 recording by a band called Genesis, and the album was called Nursery Crime. And the song that I liked most on this album was called The Musical Box. And so I think I was 12 years old when I first heard this, and it actually came from the record collection of a neighbor of mine who was a chemistry student, and I sometimes visited him in like our apartment block and listened to his records. And this was actually the first record that he agreed to borrow to me. Because this was his very valuable vinyl record collection. that actually later was destroyed by the rabbit of his girlfriend. So they had a rabbit, and this rabbit was like running through their room, and actually it was eating all the records.
So not especially the Genesis one. So there were
all of them.
So there was a lot of trust. Interesting that
Yes.
you mentioned Reinhard May, and that you could understand the words as a kid. And with Genesis, it might not be the case that you understand the words. So I think that's something interesting we can keep, because in what you're doing at the moment, there is also a part of understanding, or more, let's say, feeling or understanding the sound or what it sounds, and then trying to understand. So Björn, who are you? What do you do for a living, so that we know what's the context behind these words?
Right. So my name is Björn Eichstädt. I am living in Munich, Germany. I'm married. I have an 8-year-old son who actually is just at the moment becoming a big fan of Queen. Yes, I'm co-running a communications agency, like co-running and co-owning a communications agency called Storymaker with a little bit over 40 employees. I am mainly working for technology companies that want to communicate like their identity, like what they are doing, what is special about them, to different types of stakeholders. So to customers, or to potential customers, to potential employees, to the public as a whole. And one thing that is like a little bit of my speciality is that I work a lot for Japanese companies, and that has to do with a very special passion that I have about Japan. Yeah, so communication, Japan, these are topics that I'm into. These are topics that I'm passionate about.
Wow. So that was also, by the way, how we get into contact, because I heard a podcast of you for the Think Twice podcast. And it was about Japan. It was, I think, more than 1 hour talk.
Actually, it was 2 hours.
It's 2 hours.
Yes,
but I listened to it in different sets, and I thought, wow, that's so interesting. And I just reached out to you. So let's talk. And my background is, so I have never been in Japan, but I love Japan in different ways, or find it extremely interesting. And then we had a talk, maybe also nearly 2 hours. And at the very end, so we didn't touch music, but at the very end, there was a musical connection. So that was the idea to dive into it. So let's see. Maybe just first talk about your relation to Japan, and then it would also be interesting to see if there's something like a sound difference between Germany or for the companies that you work.
That is an interesting fact that not many people know about. So in the 1970s, there was a very close connection between the German television, mainly the second German television, ZDF, and the Japanese anime production world. And there were a lot of co-productions of the second German national television and the Japanese animation world. And actually the German television with their projects that they ordered from the Japanese animation studios somehow helped to make the Japanese animation world survive in the 1970s. And so there was one television series, it was called Marco.
Oh, never heard of.
You probably know Heidi.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there was a series of maybe like 20 to 30 different series that the Japanese were producing for German television, and one of them was Heidi, and another was Marco. And Marco was the story of a little boy, and this little boy, he was living in Italy, and they were living in Italy in the times of crisis, and so there was a lot of unemployment, and like his father was unemployed, and they were really poor. And so the mother decided to move to Argentina as a like a migration worker. And
wow, what a story! So
yeah,
Germany, Japan, Italy,
yes.
Argentina. I still try to follow you.
Yes, and already in the first episode, like the mother is leaving, and the little boy is really like feeling miserable, and then after 2 or 3 episodes, he decides to follow his mother to Argentina and search her in Argentina. And so it's a really tragic story. And around the time when the series was aired, actually my own parents were separating, and so this was really, really resonating with me. And like this type of like animation, like Japanese animation, since then is somehow connected with me on a very like emotional level, because it was something that really connected with my situation, and where I felt like somebody, like the storyteller who was telling this, he somehow understood my situation. And so,
hey, by the way, just one question.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because it was dubbed in German, right? So because
Yes.
talking about Japanese anime,
yes.
But in Germany we dubbed everything, and this wasn't a problem for anime, but for other films sometimes that's annoying. Okay.
Yes. Good. Yeah. So of course it was dubbed in German. I didn't know at the time it was Japanese. But somehow it had an aesthetical influence on me. And actually today I'm owning like an animation cell from like original animation cell from this series. Have it at home, it's hanging on my wall. And so that was like a first thing, like very deep in my past. And then when I was about 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, and then the Nintendo Entertainment System came to Europe, like the first console with replaceable cartridges. And so I think I was the first kid in my class who was owning one. And so I became a really big fan of Super Mario, of Zelda, and like all these very classical games. And then at that time, in Germany, we had the first like video game magazines, and there was one called Power Play, and they and I was always buying that at the newsstand. And in one issue, they had a very long article about the Tokyo Game Show, and so in this article, for the first time, I saw Japanese characters because they were showing screenshots. And the younger of our listeners probably don't remember that. Actually, the word screenshot comes from like people really sitting in front of TVs with a camera, taking pictures of the screen, shooting
so literally.
Yeah. And that's why still today, if you do a screenshot, for example, on your Mac, you still have this like click noise of a camera. Because originally it was taken with a camera, and so that a lot of the sound design, so to talk about sound design, comes from this like analog approach of taking pictures of screens. And so there, for the first time, I saw Japanese characters because they were showing pictures of the early like stages of games that then later, like years later, often were brought to Europe or to America. And so there I became somehow interested. And that was the first time when I got the idea that somehow, somewhere is this like miraculous place called Japan, where they do all this great stuff and where they produce these wonderful games that really Yeah, they really resonated with me, and it was very interesting that many years later I read a book by the designer who did the Super Mario and Zelda games, where he explained that actually he made these games for children of today, like children in Tokyo, etc., that do not have that much nature around them, and that a lot of these games were actually trying to replicate his own feelings when he was strolling around in the countryside when he was a kid, which I thought was really interesting, because it brought people to stay at home, and it brought children to stay at home, not to go outside.
It's a productive approach.
Yeah, but it somehow was creating a something like a meta outside in a way, a meta version of the outside, and it was creating this like parallel world that I had also experienced, for example, when I was listening to at the same time like early progressive rock albums by bands like Genesis. So for me, like these video games and the worlds they created, they were very similar in a way to like what the music was creating for me. It was something that was not the actual, sometimes boring reality that you feel when you are like a kid or a teenager, but they opened up like this space. And so yeah, that was when I first connected with Japan, and then now it's a little quicker. Then when I was a student, I became really interested in Japanese films because of a friend of mine who was working at Philips in Eindhoven in Holland, a software engineer who's still working at Philips. So when I visited him during my university days, he showed me some Japanese films, and they really interested me a lot.
Björn, what films were these?
Oh, okay. It started with, at the time, there was a trend that was coming from Japan to California first. And this was the so-called J-horror films, Japanese.
J-horror, okay.
J-horror, Japanese horror films. And the most famous of these is a movie called Ringu, The Ring, that was later remade by Hollywood with the actress Naomi Watts. But actually wasn't very good. The remake, the original, was really good. And another very famous film that now has been made into a Netflix series was called Bjoern. And that was also remade in the US with the title The Grudge. And these films were very different horror films to what we had in the West. So they were, it was not about blood, it was not about shock effects, but it was more about something creepy crawling through the television set.
So some kind of tension, some kind of suspense, not knowing what it is.
Yes, and it was a lot about, let's say, like ghosts. So in Japan, you call this yokai. It's more like translated as spirits. So in Japan, like one of the basic religions of the country is the so-called Shinto religion. And in this Shinto religion, there's like a lot of things in nature somehow are spirits, are alive. There's a lot of like this ghostly figures and demons and so there's also a lot of Japanese, let's say, like fairy tales that have all these like specific characters that are like invisible to the human eye, but that are existing. And so a lot of these very classical Japanese fairy tale approaches and also religious approaches, they are always present in like recent and contemporary films and in music and everywhere. And so this really interested me, and this feeling it was creating really interested me. And also these films had really interesting sound design.
I can imagine.
Yes.
Maybe one question in between, because I didn't know the J-horror films, but in the 80s, Akira Kurosawa, I don't know if you, I think you know him,
yes,
and Toru Takemitsu, I think he, famous composer, he was doing, let's say, film scores. And what impressed me was this very aesthetical way of making movies. And although I'm anti-militaristic in the way I was watching these war films of, what was it, the 1600s, of Japanese, with an aesthetic that was appealing. And I think the sound was really a part to, you might not hear it, but later you would recall it from, hey, there was more than just the pictures.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, Takemitsu is a really good example of the of like Japanese sound aesthetics, because what he often did was to combine, let's say, like Western classical music approaches with traditional Japanese instrumentation and traditional Japanese sounds. Actually, I have a, I don't know, like Japanese 50 CD box of like the complete collection of Toru Takemitsu soundtrack recordings at home.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes. So he did a lot of very interesting things. I would say what he did in soundtracks is a little bit comparable to what Ennio Morricone did in Italy. So actually, what you know, or when you see the Akira Kurosawa films, is this is more like the more mainstream work of his soundtrack career. Yeah. So it's a little bit like what you can compare in Ennio Morricone's work with like the Sergio Leone soundtracks and
with
like
the spaghetti westerns.
Yes, spaghetti western, but also like Once Upon a Time in America and like this stuff. Yeah. While you know that Ennio Morricone also did the like very experimental work, like first in the free improvisation space, but also in films. So when he did, for example, his like Giallo soundtrack recordings for the films, like early films of Dario Argento in Italy, for example, which also is from the horror film space, actually. So, and this is same for Toru Takemitsu. So he did a lot of very experimental underground film soundtracks in the 1960s and 70s, especially.
And he's a contemporary composer, so he was on the big festivals all over the world. And and what I didn't know last time I saw also a score. It was also a graphical score from Takemitsu, and that was very interesting because it was also visually very appealing. Not just, let's say, the dots, the notes on the score, but it was like a piece of art, and also an interesting aspect.
Yes. So to come back to like the Japanese films. So actually, I would say I was always already as a kid a very audio and visual person. So I was interested in film as well as in sound, and like video game for me always was a great combination of that. So I loved to sing as a kid. I loved to sing the Super Mario soundtrack. So this is like I I always loved, for example, like the soundtracks of the Japanese video games. And this later came back to me with the Japanese films. And so I started, I would say, like in the late 1990s, when I was still in university, I started to really become addicted when it came to Japanese films. So I literally watched hundreds of Japanese films. And in 2000 or 2001, there was a festival starting in Germany called the Nippon Connection in Frankfurt. It's nowadays actually the biggest Japanese film festival outside of Japan. And I started to travel there every year, like for a week, and like watch, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 Japanese films every day. And so,
were they original or were they
yes,
with subtitles?
With subtitles.
So that's interesting. Then the first time you get different sounds that you don't understand, and sometimes in this podcast, that's also a theme to the difference between instrumental and music with voice, but also the variation of voice that you understand or that you don't understand.
Yes, but since I was always a sound person. To me, actually, this like Japanese language that was always more like an instrument that I was listening to, so actually I remember the first time many years later I actually came to Japan with my wife on our honeymoon. Actually, that was my first trip to Japan. I came to Tokyo, and it was really interesting because a lot of people were telling me, okay, Tokyo, this is like this urban jungle, and it's like concrete, and it's very aggressive in a way. And so it's not really like a nice place. And to me, literally, it was an urban jungle. And so my feeling was when I heard all these people like speak, and I didn't understand a lot because I actually didn't speak the language. For me, it really was like in the jungle. So it was more like birds singing and like sounds coming from everywhere.
Maybe that's interesting because you're planning a trip to Japan now over 10 days.
Yes.
And maybe just to share with the listener, imagine you are there. Imagine, take a place that you like, and if you close your eyes and you are at that place, what do you hear? What does it sound, and how is it different to what you hear, let's say, in Munich?
Okay. So I am at Yurakucho Station. Yurakucho Station in like very close to the Imperial Palace, where the Japanese emperor is living or like residing. Yurakucho Station is a station of the so-called Yamanote line. The Yamanote line is a train line that is almost circular, and it's like the circular train line across Tokyo. So most people in Tokyo that move inside Tokyo during the day for business meetings, etc., most of the time they use the Yamanote ring line. Okay, and Yurakucho Station is one of the very early stations that I have experienced on my first Japan trips like 12 years ago. And the interesting thing when it comes to sounds is that in Japan, every train station has its own soundtrack.
What does it mean?
They have their own melody. Every station has their own melody. That means if a train is approaching the station, then inside the train, you hear the melody of the station that you will approach. And
hang on. This means people don't say this is Yurakucho Station, next station, but you already hear a sound, and then you know, oh, hang on, that is
no,
this?
Yeah. So actually they say this, so they say we are approaching Yurakucho station, but to emphasize this, there's a melody, and it's not a sound, it's a melody. It's like, and then okay, this is this station. And every station has its own small little like soundtrack. And it's also that, on the other hand, if you stand on the platform of the station, every train line also has its own melody. So you know from the sound that this and this train line is now approaching. And here comes an interesting connection with the Japanese music scene. So in Japan, if you want to honor like a musician or a producer or a composer for their life work, for example, then one of the biggest honors they get is that they are allowed to compose a new train station sound for the train station of their city of origin. Wow. So they come from this like specific place, and then like the big honor is the mayor is coming and say like, now as an honor you are allowed to produce our new station sound. And so the question like, how is it different? How does it sound different? Is Tokyo is, and especially Tokyo, I mean also the countryside, but in the countryside you more hear like insects and nature sounds, etc., which are totally different to Germany, but especially Tokyo is a city of sound. So in Tokyo, a lot of things are actually emphasized by sound. So visual signals are emphasized by sound. So for example, traffic lights. So traffic lights, if they turn green, or in as the Japanese say, turn blue. Actually, the Japanese say the traffic light is blue. Although from our perception it's green, but in like how they look at it, it's blue. And
what's the story behind this? Because they don't have a word for green? I don't think so. Or
no. I think originally in Japan they were blue, but there was something like a global standard adoption or something, and then
they keep the word, but they changed the color.
Yes. And so so if you stand at the traffic light, for example, then there's a lot of sound signals that like tell you, okay, now it will be green soon, and then you get like beep, 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 burp, burp, burp. And then, for example, if you go then over the street, and then like the sound gets faster, and so the accelerating sound tells you that soon it will be red again. So it's like dut, 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 dut. And this is this like very typical in Japan, that you have this at train stations. Or for example, that's another thing, in 2016, I had a family trip to Japan. So this was like a holiday trip. And we were having a flight inside the country, like a local flight. And so we were going through the gate where you have to like put your ticket. And so for like I was going through the gate, putting my ticket and put the QR code there, and it just did like did it. Then like my wife was going there, was like did it. Then when my son was coming, like he was 3 years old at the time, he put his ticket and was like and he was like, oh my God. And so the thing was just like the airline had programmed like a melody sound for children tickets in their like ticket counter thing. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you have so much of this stuff where like the attention to detail is just incredible. And this is something that I had already realized before I was in Japan through watching all these movies, that like something is going on there on all levels, on like on a sound level, on a visual level, so Japan is really like a country where, in a musical sense, everything is composed and everything is defined. There's not many things that are there by accident, but like somebody like created them, and it doesn't matter if it's food or if it's sounds at train stations, or it's just intentional. Like a lot of things are just totally intentional, and you see that like, okay, there was somebody in a company, in an airline company, who made the decision that somebody should take the effort to like program an individual sound when children present their tickets. I mean, you have to imagine this. This is just
unbelievable.
Like, unbelievable
that someone would think about this. It also raises the question, if you get all these, let's say, functional sounds,
yes,
because these sounds have a function, or these melodies have a function. This is that train. You are now approaching this station. You are an adult and I am a kid. So there is a lot of functional sounds. So my question would be, how do they go together? Is this, let's say, experienced as some kind of cacophony, or because sometimes when we go to the visual part, you would say, oh wow, this is really so much going on, or at sometime an Englishman looking at a very colored shirt that I had, he said to me, oh, you have a very loud shirt. And so that's my question. So is it visually so enriching that you might get tired? And is it also oral enriching? And another question to answer would be, now these days, a lot of young people, or also elder people, they just wear headphones. How does this work?
Okay. Let me think where I start. So I think when it comes to the question of if this is overwhelming or not, I would say it depends on the person that perceives the information. So I would say when I first came to Japan, I first felt like, oh my God, this is like, wow. And then, so initially it's just like sound everywhere. And then of course, the more experienced you get by like listening to this, and the more educated you get about all this, the more you can somehow like decipher it and see like the different layers. And I mean, it's like listening to music. If you only know, I don't know, like Rolling Stones 3-minute rock songs that have 3 chords, and then you are confronted with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen or John Zorn or Toru Takemitsu, then this might be just too much for you, and because you didn't take all the steps in between that you need to understand this, and so I would say it can initially be overwhelming, but of course it's like everything that is music. I mean, I would say it's just music, and the more you have listened to it and the deeper you got into it, the more you can decipher it, understand it, and Yeah, so in the end, I would say when I come there now, or when I come there in 15 days, hopefully everything works out, or when I came there before Corona, on a very frequent level, I felt very good in this environment. It was very, actually it was
Felt at
very,
home.
yes, yeah, felt at home, and it was very calming, but it's, yeah, so I would say, is it a cacophony? Depends.
Absolutely.
It depends on who you are.
By the way, interesting for me is you just named Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and also
Yes.
John Soren, which both of them were absolutely Japan fans. And
Yes.
John Soren, he lived in Japan. And Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, he was, I think, 1970 at Osaka, was the World Exhibition. And he
Yes.
did there one of his most spectacular buildings so that people could lie on a platform, and there was music under them and around them. So the whole idea of sound projection and technology helping us to hear things that we have never heard, that was really, there he was really, really busy with. So interesting. And another link with music, I love to read Haruki Murakami, and most of their books, they have something with music. And I understood that he also had a jazz bar or a small bar where you sometimes would go into, and you only can hear music without drinking something. Is this something that you have experienced? Is this still happening?
I haven't, to be honest. So I heard about this, and I mean, jazz. If you say jazz, Japanese are like really jazz fans. So to have a jazz bar in Japan is not as unusual as it is in Europe, for example. I think that is one important thing. And so I mean, there's in Japan, there's a lot of these concepts where people have like bars or places where you go and where you have a like interesting experiences and like sound experience, or where you have very special approaches to entertainment. Let me put it that way. So probably you heard about the animal cafes in Japan. So it started many years ago with the cat cafes, but then it turned into owl. So the next big trend was owl cafes.
Oh, really?
Yes, and then the latest trend was hedgehog cafes, and so the concept is really strange. So you go there and like you pay an entrance fee. So actually, it's a cafe with an entrance fee. That's already strange to us, and the entrance fee that gives you the right to stay there for an hour, for example, and so you go there, you get a cup of coffee that usually doesn't taste very good, and you are allowed to play with the cats or the owls.
And what about the hedgehog?
Or the hedgehogs. Or the hedgehogs, you are allowed to play with them and like do a little like Gucci with them, and so that's Japanese entertainment. And some of this stuff really resonates with me. The animal cafe, not so much. That was a little disappointing. So of course I try all this stuff when I'm in Japan. To the jazz cafe, and Murakami, he does a lot of things in Japan. And he just opened like a very big Murakami library, and so there's a lot of things, and I think he did not only have this like jazz cafe, but he also had a like jazz like some kind of jazz program on the Japanese radio.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like a Murakami favorite jazz tunes playlist on Spotify. And
there are a lot
stuff
of
like that.
them.
Yes.
And he wrote a book, or he made a book, which is about Seiji Osawa, the conductor. And that's I don't know if you know the book. I read it and I thought, oh, that's really, really for freaks. So they talk about 3 to 4 different versions of the first Brahms Sinfonia. So very interesting. And in one of his books, in 1Q84, the Janáček Sinfonetta plays a very, very special role. So when the protagonist heard that symphony or that sinfonetta, then the time changed. So I'm really interesting. I never heard comparable sound aficionado things from other literature. Is this only Murakami, or is this maybe special for Japan?
I mean, Japan is full of music freaks, and so I've never seen or experienced such a big density of people that are somehow educated in music. So most of the people that I meet when I'm on business trips in Japan somehow play an instrument. With most people, you can really talk about music. They know something about music. So I would say the quality of music education in Japan seems to be very high. And I mean, you also see it when you look at, for example, classical orchestras in Europe, etc. You always have Japanese in them. So the music education seems to be very good. But actually, I don't know much about like how music education in Japanese schools, for example, works. But this is something I realized. And it's also, for example, that some of the very best record stores I have experienced in my life are in Tokyo. So
what makes them special?
Well, for example, there's a record store chain called Disc Union, and Disc Union in Japan. For example, in Tokyo, they have, I don't know, like 10 different stores, and these are all like specialized on certain genres. So, so for example, there's the Disc Union store in the Shinjuku district. They are specialized for progressive rock. So you simply get everything there. Like you get every, let's say, like Italian prog rock album that was ever released on CD, you get it there. You go there and get it. And then there's like another one that is specialized on Japanese traditional music, and another one is specialized on soundtracks. And so those are simply the shops that where like my feeling was the deepness of like experience in a certain field is just like mind-blowing. And another thing is also that the Japanese collector scene is just amazing. I mean, when the internet started in like the mid-90s, like the internet for you and me started in the 1990s, and the first like secondhand record sellers went online in like the second part of the 1990s. I remember at the time I was buying a lot of albums from a secondhand record shop in Canada. And so they always sent like big boxes of records over the ocean. And so I once had a like phone conversation with them and was talking a little bit about their business. And they always told me like 80% of the records that we sell go to Japan. And I also, in my 20s, I had a lot of contact with like professional record dealers. A lot of them were telling me like, actually the Japanese are buying everything. And I think that's like one thing. So you really have a collector scene. And the other important thing is you really have a technology scene. Mm-hmm. So one thing is you have a hi-fi equipment scene. So you have a lot of Japanese really good hi-fi equipment companies. The other thing is you have a lot of instrument companies. And that is like traditional instruments as well as like modern instruments, like in the field of like keyboards and synthesizers, etc. You have like Yamaha, and you have Casio, and you also have a lot of Japanese companies that most people don't know are Japanese because they don't have very Japanese names, like Roland or Korg. Yep. Like you would not initially think this is Japanese because Japanese sounds like Yamaha and stuff like that, and Toyota, but not like Korg or Roland. Like, why should that be Japanese? But it is. And
but Yamaha has a nice logo.
Yeah.
You know what it is? There are 3 tuning forks.
Yeah.
So if you ever have seen it, Yamaha, that's a very musical company.
Yeah. Yes, and so you have very high quality musical instruments, and you have like educated collector scene, and you have like hi-fi equipment companies. So so sound is something that is very present, and of course you have a lot of like also recent developments. I was just today listening to a new non-Japanese like new pop album that is just celebrated as like being like the new big thing. And when I listen to
what is it?
Oh, it's I'm very bad with names. You would not think I'm bad with names, but so it's the Charlie XCX album. It's like big hit all around the world. The album is called Crash, and so I would say it's like mainstream pop. It's maybe but it seems like the impact it has right now is what the impact of Lady Gaga was maybe like 10 years ago. But if you listen to this, it's like you think, okay, this is like Japanese pop music 20 years ago. So it seems to be like the latest thing, but it sounds like Japan 20 years ago. And so you had a lot of developments like Vocaloid, for example, like the modified vocal stuff. Yep. This is an invention by Yamaha. And so it initially started in Japanese pop music in the early 2000s, that these kind of like vocal modifications were used.
Autotune.
This is all Japanese. And the other thing is that like the use of video game sounds in pop music, for example, this is also something that started many, many years ago in Japan. And now more and more becomes mainstream in the West. But it's just like, I always say that like Japan is so often like 20 years ahead of everybody else. And that is an interesting phenomenon, that the way that Japan is ahead and the time that Japan is ahead is so big that a lot of people actually think Japan is behind.
That's interesting.
Yes, because
it's like a circle.
Yeah, because so you often think that a country like, for example, the US is ahead because you see in a certain time frame, you see the adoption of what they are doing. So you say like, okay, this was big in the US last year, and now it's big here, and so you see this. So you see this process, but for Japan, you often don't see it because it's just like what happens here now is it happened in Japan 20 years ago, and so the time frame is just too long to understand this. And I just read in the media that in Berlin, they just now opened the first capsule hotel. Hotel where have these capsules. And this was somehow celebrated as like very contemporary and new and fresh and something. this concept was invented in 1978 in Japan.
Yeah.
And so this is like 44 years ago. And so a lot of these things happen where you think like, somehow I know this. I've seen this before. This must come from somewhere in Japan. And so this is something that I find so fascinating. And there's this book by, I completely changed the topic now. There's this book by Erich von Däniken. His first book, I don't know the English title, but the German title was Erinnerungen an die Zukunft.
Remembrance at the future.
Of the future, whatever. The future. So yeah, and like memories of the future, actually, in a way. But I don't know the English name. I think the English name is Chariots of the Gods, which is totally different. Yeah. But actually, I can recommend the film that was made after this, because it has very great music by Peter Thomas, the German film composer. So back to this book. And so, I mean, in this book, this is about, it's typical Erich von Däniken. It's like how in like ancient artifacts in like archaeology, you can find like hints that thousands of years ago, aliens were visiting the Earth. So, and actually, it's a little bit similar in Japan. So in the Japanese past, you often find hints towards the contemporary trends in Europe or in America, etc. Like, so if you go like deeper into like Japanese history and like recent history, you see a lot of things that you now see here. And you mentioned before, when we were like briefly discussing Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, you were mentioning the Osaka Expo 1970, and this is, for example, the Osaka Expo is really fascinating because, so one thing is, in like non-Japanese language, there's not a lot of material about the Expo 70. So it's very difficult, for example, to find original like film footage, for example, of the Expo 70. It's also really difficult to find information on the internet that goes really deep into the different like pavilions and the different like what was really going on there. But of course, if you research a little bit more, then you find information. And at this expo, there were obviously a lot of things happening that were just very futuristic. So, for example, the like running sushi system that was first introduced at the Osaka Expo 1970.
Wow! And when did we have it here in the West? 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
Maybe 20, but like, so, and this was actually an idea by like a sushi chef in Osaka who was in his day job working at a company that was doing like production systems for factories. And he was just thinking, okay, like, how can I use this like conveyor belt thing?
Yeah, right.
Maybe I can use this at a factory to bring like a part from A to B. So maybe I can use this also in a restaurant if I don't have waiters or if I want to save on waiters, to deliver food to the people sitting at the tables. And since he was in the evening working at a sushi restaurant, he was saying, okay, let's try this.
And also different sounds. So if you sit there, you hear the conveyor belt and yes. You don't hear a waiter asking you things. I would like to segue back to what we talked before. So we talked about the sensibility and maybe also sensitivity of sound in Japan, because this is, let's say, the power of music thinking. my hypothesis is that the way you listen is the way you act and the way you behave in different things. So my question would be, can you make any analogy between the way sound is used in Japan to their business?
Yes, I can. So I was not prepared for this question, but I think I can answer it. So yes, I can when it comes to listening. So listening is a very important part of Japanese business. And so there's different reasons for that. Like one reason is Japan is a group culture. And in this group culture, like the major goal is to create harmony among the group. And so to create harmony, the one important thing is to not allow dissonance. And so what Japanese do is before a performance, in business we call this a business meeting. Before the performance, there's something called nemawashi, and nemawashi means that people create harmony within the orchestra, in this case the team, before the actual performance.
So like an active harmonizer to bring everybody in the right mood.
Yes. So that means, for example, in Europe or in America, like a business meeting, that is something where like you go, you propose an idea, and then you have an exchange of opinion, and like people are fighting, and they have a discussion, and they do not agree, or they agree. Sometimes they agree. So it's more like a ring, like a boxing ring. So somehow, in the end, you get some kind of result. Like either like one person is dead, or like an idea is accepted, etc. So in Japan, this is not the case. In Japan, the business meeting is a performance, and is a performance of which the outcome before the meeting is already clear. So it's totally clear what kind of piece they are playing. It's totally clear how the piece sounds. So it's like you can totally expect what is happening there. It's not a free improvised concert. It's like a Beethoven symphony. You know the piece, and to make this happen, all people that are involved before have their own like individual conversations. So their own like test sessions, practice sessions. They talk to each other. They practice this instrument and that instrument. And then they sit there and you do the performance. Everything works as discussed and everybody's happy. And so this means for non-Japanese, this is often very confusing because they get to this meeting and they expect this like spectacle in the ring, while what they get is something that they feel is very boring, because it just feels like, okay, they are all sitting there, nobody is discussing, they are just listening, nodding, because they know what is going on. So they just say like, yes. And so this is like one example that this process of listening to opinions, etc. This in Japan is a lot prolonged, but since a lot of the non-Japanese foreign business travelers, they do not experience this process, and because of that, they think the Japanese do not discuss, but actually they discuss a lot more than the non-Japanese. But this all happens not in the context that we think it should happen in. And
that's interesting. That's
yes.
interesting. It's also when I talk about, rehearsal or demoing or prototyping, or which word you want to use in, let's say, design thinking or in music thinking, it's something like, so there's actually a lot of work going on around, let's say, the performance. And you know that in music thinking, I'm using listen, tune, play, and perform as the 4 phases. So yes. I'm just bringing it up because it's so obvious. Talking about, if you really want to perform, you have to listen all the time. So that's why listening goes through all the others. But there's also a tuning part. And they overlap. If it would be, let's say, 4 different steps, it wouldn't make any sense. Or that's, sometimes we do this in the West. We do an analysis and then we come up with conclusions and we show it to people, and they often don't like it. So here, these things are really are overlapping. So that absolutely resonates a lot with me.
Yes, so that's the meeting. Then there's another thing, and that is, in general, listening to the customer is very important. So in the West, we sometimes say, like, the customer is king, and sometimes we are not really sure if we really mean this. While in Japan, there's a saying that is, the customer is God. So
oh, wow.
The customer is not a king, but the customer is God. And this means it's like, what Japanese always do is they ask themselves, okay, like, what will the customer think about this? Will this work for the customer? And so they are very good at, like, listening, you could say, but you could also say changing the perspective, which somehow has to do with listening. And they, for example, you probably know the English word. I don't know the English word. There's a German word called Leitsystem.
Wayfinding systems.
Yeah, like wayfinding systems. So I've never experienced something like in Japan, that actually in one of the biggest train stations in the world, Shinjuku Station in Tokyo, where I think per day 3 million passengers are getting through this train station. I've never lost my way. And it's
as a foreigner.
As a foreigner. And this is really, really amazing, because what in Japan really works is that, I don't know how they do it, to be honest, but it must be that they somehow make a plan, and then that, like, 50 people, like, walk this way, and if one person loses the way, then they change the system because it's not good enough.
Wow.
Yes.
So in service design terms, this would be actually a little bit the way how service design works. But I don't know how they do this or manage this on that level. That would be interesting.
Well, one thing is really effort, taking the effort is extremely important. And I've experienced this in projects with Japanese clients, that what you said before, like, practicing is something that is really, really, really important. So for example, if you have an event with the Japanese company, and then you have, like, a plan, like, one thing is, the information that you get is really exact. It's like an orchestra score. So you have this event, and it says, okay, first thing is, like, the speech by the Japanese consul. This speech will start at 10:01 and it will last until 10:04. Then at 10:05, this next person comes. Then this person ends at 10:09, and from 10:10, like from 10:10 to 10:15, there's going to be, like, the musical part, and then so it's very precise. And then what you realize is, when you saw this, you say, like, okay, how the hell are they going to do this without getting delayed? And the answer is practicing. So 2 days before you get to the venue, and then you play the whole thing, and then they have people, like, simulating the speakers. They have the speaking script saying, like, okay, and then they say, okay, this was like we tried it 3 times, it was still too long. So we have to change the schedule. But then on the day they will have like this exact schedule, and to say like, oh my God, this is like, it's like an orchestra piece. So it's actually like something where we say, oh my God, it's just a business event. For them, it's like an orchestra performance.
It's like, it's even like a co-creation, because actually it sounds like they co-create how it's made, and then they make the score based on how they co-created the outcome.
Yes, you could say that.
And,
yes.
and that's interesting. Talking about Stockhausen, maybe the last time today, Stockhausen made for his hymnen, he didn't have the score because it was an electronic piece. But later he transcribed a lot of things, and he called it Mitlesepartitur. So it's only the score that you can read for your pleasure, and to read what's happening in the sound. So that sounds a little bit like the co-created part, and then having a perfect score that fits 100% to the performance.
Yeah, you could say that. So yes, that is also something that I've experienced. So like this practicing, listening, experiencing how things are working is very important. And there's like one thing, and I don't know if it has to do with music, but maybe is there is a Japanese way of listening that they call reading the air.
Wow.
And that means so Japanese are most, of course, it's not like 100% thing, but most Japanese are very, very aware of like this. It's again dissonance. They are very aware of dissonance that might appear in a different person based on something. So if you, for example, if you get the job as a communications agency that we are, to do, let's say, like a company presentation for the Japanese company, then in Europe you would have like one person, I don't know, like the marketing lead, for example, who will make the decision about this presentation. And the process will be relatively quick, usually. And then at one point, this person would say, okay, make the decision. But then afterwards, like when the presentation is spreading inside the company, there will be departments that will say, oh, but like what we do is not really reflected in this presentation. And there will be like this other, and they will say, oh, no, this, oh, I don't see myself in this. And so, okay. And in Japanese companies, all of this, most of the time, is anticipated. So people are sitting there, seeing this presentation, and then they think of the people they work with. They think of like the neighbor section in the company. They think of this person who is responsible for the international market. They think of this person, and they talk to them. And they do not only listen to their reaction, but they also listen to their non-reaction. So wow. they listen to sound, but they also listen to silence. And so they just say like, okay, I did this and this, and the person did not react enthusiastic. There's a mistake in our presentation. Otherwise, this person would be enthusiastic, for example. Wow. And so it sometimes takes months until you have a final product, like a final, and product means like communication tool. And the thing is, then afterwards, nobody ever discusses this anymore. So like this this like listening process and anticipating and reading the air and making something perfect and practicing it, etc. This takes very long. And for Europeans, you are sometimes really frustrated and think like, this takes too long. It's just like, oh my God, why don't they rush this a little bit more? But then you realize what you get afterwards is something that everybody feels fine with, everybody. And so, yes, so if you say like, okay, and we came from this, they obviously listen because they have a lot of these sounds. Yes, they do. And this is also something that happens in business a lot. Listening, feeling, sensing might be a better word. Sensing some things, but that also means that time is different in Japan, because the goal is different. The goal is not getting things done, but the goal is creating harmony. And that is very different. And that means that something I had to learn when working with Japanese companies is to understand that the concept of time is just different, and that long-term thinking and something that like works with everybody is more important than checking your to-do item on your list quickly.
Yeah. In that sense, it's also very, let's say, the approach, or maybe also an answer of our times, because we are wasting the planet, because we are only thinking about short-term quick fixes that we have to do where we can make money with, or that's the little bit the Western standard. So in that sense,
I wanted to say it depends a little bit on who we are.
Yeah.
So if we is humankind, then I would say, okay, the Japanese approach is part of that. So it's maybe not we, but yes, which at the same time doesn't mean that that there's no pollution in Japan, etc. Of course, there's pollution in Japan. It's just that the general thinking and philosophy behind a lot of things is just different. It's just very different. And of course, that also sometimes creates things that are not good for the planet. But actually, my feeling is that the awareness for this is a lot higher in Japan. So they know that something is not good, and they think about this deeply, but the actions that are taken are not as fast and as like action driven, but they only happen when something like when like the bigger group has come to a conclusion. And I can give you one example that for me was really fascinating. It was, I don't know, 2012, 2013, and I was traveling to Japan, and at the time in European hotels, you sometimes had Wi-Fi. You sometimes had free Wi-Fi. You sometimes had Wi-Fi that you had to pay for. You sometimes had working Wi-Fi. You sometimes did not have Wi-Fi. You sometimes had broken down Wi-Fi. You sometimes had Wi-Fi that cost 20 euro a day but didn't work. So it was but it felt like we have Wi-Fi in the hotel. In Japan, they didn't have Wi-Fi in the hotel. And I was, okay, like, why don't they have, they are a very advanced country, why don't they have Wi-Fi in the hotel? And so I returned like some months later, no Wi-Fi in the hotel. And I think, okay, what's going on here? So I returned again, like 3 months later. Suddenly, like all of the hotels I was visiting had free Wi-Fi and was perfectly working. And I was thinking like, okay, what the hell? Like, how did this happen? Like in 3 months, everywhere I go. And so then I did like a little bit of research and was talking to people, and they said to me, yeah, well, like all the representatives of the hotels and of the Japanese Hotel Association and of the Japanese Tourism Association, etc., they came together for the last 3 years and discussed the Wi-Fi issue. And they were discussing like how to perfectly realize this like completely across Japan, and like how to kickstart this and how to make sure that like from the one day to the next day, this is going to work. And so they had a lot of discussions, a lot of things to do, and suddenly like it worked.
So there was a lot of prototyping or demoing before
Yes.
they finally give
Yes.
it to the client.
Yes.
And in the West, we just said, oh, we have Wi-Fi, but everybody experienced it in a different way or didn't work.
Yes. And this is because, again, the listening issue. So they really take the customer seriously. And if you do something that is annoying the customer, that's like the worst thing you can do. Because as I said, the customer is God. And so that means annoying God. Like how can you do that? And so this is something that you experience a lot, that even with like smaller things, let's say like the train is delayed a little bit, etc. That's like the cliche, but it works with other things as well, is that like if the train is delayed by 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something, then like the next day, like the board of the Japanese train station, they do a press conference and they say sorry to the population of Japan. And they bow very deeply and say like, we are very sorry, we completely fucked up, the train was delayed 15 minutes. And so this is just something that they don't want to do, because it's, as you might know, in East Asia, like you have this concept of losing your face. So actually you don't want to lose your face in front of the customer. And that means like everybody does everything they can do to just like prototype and check and test before something is brought to the public. And that means it sometimes just takes longer. And so it doesn't feel like the Western way of acting. So it often feels like things are standing still in a way, but then they miraculously move. And
nice.
And this is something that you see a lot. And another thing is that they also see it very holistically. So it's not only that things are moving like in this direction, like in the forward dimension, but they are also changing in the like down and up dimensions in a way, or like younger and older people, for example. So when it comes to payment, this Western and sometimes also Chinese discussions where it says like, okay, like mobile payment with your phone, that's like the one thing that you need to have. And if there's no mobile payment and you cannot pay with Apple Pay or WeChat Pay or whatever, then this is like something that is behind. And advanced is that everything is digital, for example. In Japan, the idea is different. The idea is advanced is if you have something that everybody is happy with. And everybody means a 10-year-old kid, a 25-year-old, but it also means like a 90-year-old grandmother. If all of these people are happy with the payment system, then it's good. And something is digital is not a value, but the value is people are happy with it. Harmony is created. And so that means the so-called disruptive innovation approach that we know in the West, but also China, is we destroy the old, create something digital, disrupt the system, and frustrate a lot of people because they cannot pay the way they want to pay anymore. But we have innovation. Thank God. We have innovation.
What it's worth, right?
Yes. And so in Japan, it's that, so I once visited like a payment company, and like what they did is they worked like years on like a payment terminal where you simply can pay with everything. So you can pay with cash, and you can put the cash in the payment terminal, and it's like counted automatically, and like how much money it is presented on a screen. But you can also pay with your credit card. You can also pay with your bank card. You can pay with your European credit card. You can pay with your Chinese credit card. You can pay with your American credit card and with your Japanese credit card. But you can also pay with Apple Pay, with WeChat Pay, with Alipay, with Everything Pay, and you can even pay with Bitcoin. Okay. And then they say, okay, this is our new payment terminal. It took 10 years to develop, but here it is, and everybody's happy with that. So this is something where I would say, this is a very, very, very different way of approaching things, so in terms of like, thinking of this in music is really like, so like the confrontation of the like Western approach and this Japanese approach is like confrontation of, I don't know, like heavy metal and Bach or something. It's just like, it's just totally different approaches, and
absolutely
both can be beautiful in a way, but it's totally different.
In that sense, let's say heavy metal, and on the other side, let's say shakuhachi, that is still played in Japan. So Björn, thank you very much for all these insights, and thank you for sharing with us, let's say, that harmony concept, the concept of the listen to sound and silence. So not just listening what's there, but also listening to what's not there. And I like very much that performance aspect. So the performance of a business meeting, or the performance of being a train, being in time. And also that long-term and also short-term thinking, so that in long-term that you really prepare things and you think it through. We talked about the Osaka 1970 things, and at a certain moment to implement it, or not just to implement it, to offer it to the client at a moment with we already can visualize the bow that you do for your client, and you give it, and you know that the client wants it. So yes. Thank you very much for all these insights, and also taking us to Tokyo. And maybe we do another very long session, but only with sounds, only with the sounds of Tokyo, the sounds of standing in the station of the Yurakucho station, and all these sounds. So I hope that we can find these sounds, and maybe I can also put them in the podcast. So thank you very much, Björn, for being on The Power of Music Thinking.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was big fun.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this, because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.